Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meira K Show, where we will be discussing everything that is happening in Israel right now. I hope you got some sleep. We've been having sirens almost every night, so it's a sleepless episode, but I think it's going to be great. So let's dive right in. First things first. Is Netanyahu being funded by Qatar? QatarGate is the biggest scandal happening here in Israel, and we need to break down everything that's going on because, like always, it's probably not what you think if you're only reading the headlines from the mainstream media. Okay, so before we dive into the weird details of what's happening specifically in Netanyahu's office, we first need to talk about Qatar, because you've probably heard of them. They're everywhere. They're in every football game, on every airline, and as we now have discovered, funding almost every university in the United States. But who are Qatar, and why are they interested in taking over what it seems the West with their money? So Qatar is a small country in the Arabian Peninsula who has a huge amount of impact for its size. Why? Because they have tons of money from all the oil and gold that they own, and they focus in on something called soft power. This is the idea that they can influence any country by using their money to do it. And they do that all the time. I mean, you've seen them at football games, you've seen them on airlines, and you've seen them in places that you have no idea. Like the fact that they've given hundreds of millions of dollars to university campuses, infiltrating the ecosystem and the educational system of the United States with one very clear goal: to slowly impact and manipulate American students and Western people from all over the world to believe the things that Qatar find important. And that can be anything from Hamas protests to anti-Bibi narratives and many, many more topics which they care about. You've probably heard of Al Jazeera, the mainstream news media, which is actually, in my opinion, just a propaganda site to create Muslim narratives as normal. Whilst when we think about radical Islam, we tend to think about extremist terrorist group, Al Jazeera and Qatar are trying to normalize Islamic ideologies into Western society, and they're doing a really good job at it. Al Jazeera is considered a normal news site, which is absolutely insane, seeing as it's funded by a fundamentalist Islamic country, Qatar. This is the backdrop to who Qatar is, and it's important for us to understand that Qatar have been doing everything in their power to try and infiltrate anywhere they can, using their money and their influence to shape narratives, ideologies, and policies across the world. And so why is this so important for us to understand? Well, what we're seeing right now with this whole QatarGate, this big scandal happening here in Israel, is that Netanyahu's office is being accused of receiving funding from a Qatari lobbyist in America. This whole thing seems really weird, because why would Netanyahu's office receive funding from Qatar? And so QatarGate is this big scandal where it seems that potentially some Qatari lobbyists in America were paying the salaries of some aides of Netanyahu and therefore successfully infiltrating in Netanyahu's office. And now, obviously, if you look at how the right-wing news versus the left-wing news are portraying this, we're seeing two very, very different stories. And we're not yet clear on the facts, but let's just navigate this for a second. From the right, you have the media claiming that this is just another deep state attempt to bring Netanyahu down. And on the left, we have the belief that Netanyahu is actually a traitor, betraying Israel and a spy on behalf of the Qatari government. It's all a little bit far-fetched, because what it seems like to me right now, that both of these extreme narratives are not correct. I personally believe that Qatar has been trying to get into Netanyahu's office and try and infiltrate there in any way possible. And they may have potentially succeeded. Look, there's no way that Netanyahu is involved in the accounting and how his aides are getting paid. There's no way that the Prime Minister of Israel is involved to those minute details in the bureaucracy of how his office is being run. And so this is a great way for Qatar to try and infiltrate without Netanyahu being aware of it. I promise you, the Prime Minister of Israel is not involved in checking the bank statements and where the money's coming from. But still, this story is really weird. And the reason it's even more complicated than just this is because Netanyahu, during this time, has decided to sack what seems like the head of the investigation, which just brings more and more into the conspiracy theory that Netanyahu is trying to do everything in his power to get rid of this QatarGate investigation so that no one finds out and discovers that he's betraying the state of Israel. And to me, honestly, guys, this is just the most ridiculous, far-fetched story that you can come up with. And whilst this weird story would normally receive some sort of media attention, it's being blown way out of proportion. And that's because of the affiliation of this story with Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, who is now being removed from his position by government. And so it would seem that if you're just looking at this as a form of coincidence, Netanyahu is trying to sack the head of the Shin Bet as he starts the Qatar investigation. That's what it looks like. But if we delve into the context a little bit more, you'll see that Netanyahu, for months, has been firing almost everybody who was responsible for the October 7th. Okay, so why is this whole thing being blown way out of proportion, despite the fact that obviously if QatarGate is happening, it's a big deal? Well, because it's happening at the exact same time as Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, is being removed from his position as the head of intelligence here in Israel. If you look at the media headlines right now, it's unbelievably misleading. They are correlating these two stories as if the fact that QatarGate is happening is the reason that Netanyahu is getting rid of Ronen Bar. But if you understand the context and have been following the news for the last few months, you'll see that Netanyahu has actually been firing a lot of people who are responsible for what happened on October 7th, the head of intelligence being one of them. From all of the things that are coming out, it seems that Ronen Bar knew about the October 7th thing way before he let Netanyahu know about it, which in and of itself is a crazy fact to think about. But moving away from that, it's become clear that Ronen Bar and Netanyahu just don't get along. We can see this in one of the things that happened this week, where Netanyahu called for the government to decide to get rid of Ronen Bar, and Ronen Bar basically said, no, I'm not interested in that. The government doesn't really have the jurisdiction to do that, which if you look at the law, which is written right here, it's very clear and self-explanatory that this is exactly what the government's responsibility is to do. They're allowed to get rid of the head of Shin Bet because the Shin Bet is directly under the government. They are the intelligence source for what happens here in Israel. And therefore, if the head of the government, the prime minister, Bibi Netanyahu, does not feel that he can trust the head of the intelligence to provide him with the information that he needs, then of course they can get rid of him. That's their right, their legal right. But Ronen Bar is saying, no, I don't agree with that. And he's doing that in a public forum, which means that potentially he's been doing way worse behind the scenes, something that we have not been privy to. And so Netanyahu for the last few months has been going on a spree of getting rid of people after they do the inquiries. One of the big questions and debates here in Israel is if there should be an October 7th inquiry happening right now, or if it should happen later on once the war is finished. And there's many different perspectives on this and many different opinions. But one of the things that we're seeing is that Netanyahu, once an inquiry is finished, let's say by the head of the IDF, Netanyahu is then removing them from the position. Same with the Shin Bet. There was an intelligence inquiry, which Ronen Bar was supposed to present to Netanyahu. So Netanyahu has slowly been firing every person who's somewhat responsible. Now, the question of if Netanyahu should resign because he's responsible as well is one we'll leave for another time. But that's what's been happening. And Ronen Bar was the next in line. So you've got this weird story in which Netanyahu is potentially being funded by Qatar, or at least his aides are, and we don't have really any concrete details on this. And the Shabak is looking into it, the Shin Bet. And the head of the Shin Bet is also being fired now by Netanyahu. And it looks like a coincidence, but it might actually be the other way around. It might be that Ronen Bar has put forward this investigation into QatarGate, knowing that if he does this at this time, it will look like this is what's happening, in which reality is that Ronen Bar needed to leave ages ago. He needed to be dismissed a whole while ago, and he wasn't. And it was delayed and delayed and delayed until the investigation was finished. And now that the investigation is finished, he suddenly launched this investigation into Netanyahu, hoping to provide ammunition to the people who don't want him removed. And when I say the people who don't want him removed, we're talking in Maine about the Supreme Court and the masses of people in Israel who support a more left-wing agenda here and who want to see Netanyahu gone at all cost. For some reason, there is an unbelievable hatred of Netanyahu in this country, and this is run by this left-wing propaganda machine that runs our media, runs our news systems, runs our secret service, unfortunately, and runs our judicial system, which is why you'll see things on the news about the Attorney General completely leaving her area of jurisdiction and coming at the government time and time again. It seems, from what we're seeing on the news, that she is just another agent of this anti-Netanyahu Bibi hate machine that is propagating our country and creating such a lack of unity. We're seeing mass protests against the removal of Ronen Bar when it says so clearly in the law that it is the government's right to get rid of the head of the Shin Bet if the government feels that that's what needs to happen. And that's what the Prime Minister is saying. He is saying very clearly, I have lost the trust of Ronen Bar. He can no longer be the head of security because he is denying information from me. And yet, there's a whole group of people in the country who think, no, the Prime Minister doesn't have that right. And the Justice Court is doing just that. It's insane that the Supreme Court here in Israel is stepping into this story when the law is clear as day. They're stepping in and they're claiming that this is Netanyahu's right. And that's the story that you're seeing right now. This completely insane conspiracy theory in which Ronen Bar has known for ages that he's going to be removed from his position. And as this whole thing's happening, Ronen Bar has quickly launched an investigation into Qatar so that he can use that as a catalyst to prove to the world that really Netanyahu just wants to get rid of him because Netanyahu is a dictator. Netanyahu is not a dictator. I'm sick and tired of hearing that. Our country is a democracy, and the people just don't like the fact that the majority in this country is more right-wing than it is left-wing, and the people on the left just can't handle that. So they are pushing the justice, the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, these mass protests in which they're calling for the end of the country. They're literally calling for crazy things, like the complete halt of the country, stopping the entire economic system if Ronen Bar gets removed from his position as the head of the Shin Bet. And yet, again, I will refer back to the simple facts. It says in the law that the Prime Minister's right and obligation to remove the head of the Shin Bet if he doesn't feel like he has his confidence. That's what's happening. It's nothing to do, in my opinion, with QatarGate. I think the QatarGate investigation was launched as another way of bringing Netanyahu down. But time will tell. We will find out more and more details as we go on. This whole thing is basically under some sort of gag order for some reason, which you would think that if Qatar is really funding our prime minister, that we should all know about it. We should all have the intelligence, but it's under a gag order. And right now, more and more protests are happening every single day to try and remove the government for the disgrace, the horror, the shock, the disgusting. And right now, more and more protests are happening every single day because Israelis love to protest for some reason in light of the disgusting fact that the prime minister is doing exactly what he has been commanded to do by the law of Israel. So that's a summary of what's happening right now in QatarGate. We'll be watching this story carefully because as it evolves and more information comes out, we'll see who's really lying here. Is it the media? Is it the Shin Bet? Is it Qatar? Is it Netanyahu? Who's at fault? What's happening? We will figure that out as more and more information comes out. For now, it's pretty clear that this is an attempt of both extreme sides to create more and more polarization, more and more hatred when we just don't know the actual facts of what's happening. And for the other headlines of the week, because we have a lot, we're back at war. Israel is back at war. And I say that with a smile, but I shouldn't be smiling about it because it's terrible and it's exhausting and we really want this war to end. But the only way the war ends is if we actually win and if we go back to a reality in which it's a funny thing to say going back because that's an incorrect statement. We are not going back. We are creating something new. We cannot go back to the October 6th reality in which Gaza, Hezbollah, Iran were a massive threat to our country. And so that's what we're seeing right now at war. I have not slept in a week because the God bless their souls, the Houthis, keep firing missiles. We've had missiles this week from Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. And the only way they have missiles is if Iran keeps funding them and if they're managing to regroup and attack our country. Hezbollah are claiming that they are not the ones who fired at Israel, but it doesn't matter because Israel is going right back into Lebanon and destroying their launches and any military sites that Hezbollah have. Why? Because they're claiming that the Lebanon government holds responsibility for Hezbollah managing to fire into Israel. Hezbollah are again saying that they didn't do it, but it doesn't really matter. Rockets were fired into Israel from the north. Metula, a city up north, is being evacuated, so the northern border is still at war. Going back to Gaza, Hamas managed to fire rockets at us. Hamas managed to fire rockets at us. How, after over 530 days of war, are they still firing rockets at us? And whilst we're talking about the Gaza piece, there are many other things that are happening over there. Like, did you hear about the fact that the Ministry of Defense has threatened Hamas directly, saying that we will annex land within Gaza if they keep on holding hostages from us? Meaning, and I believe this should have been our strategy from the very beginning, if Hamas continue to hold hostages from us or harm hostages or kill more hostages, we will take more land away from them. They will have a smaller Gaza at the end of this. It makes so much sense. They have our land that they shouldn't have any right to it. They're keeping our hostages, so we will take the prize that we gave them. And just FYI, in Islam, this is a really, really problematic topic. There is an idea within the Quran that once the Muslims own a certain piece of land, the most degrading and terrible thing that can happen to them is Israel now taking control of it, which is part of why there is this massive fight over Palestine/Israel. And so this is an actual threat to what Hamas believe to be the most important goal, them conquering more and more land and having more and more of Palestine, so to speak. It's a brilliant strategy and one that we must really, really move forward with. Every day that the hostages don't come home, they should lose land. Pretty simple, self-explanatory, and makes a lot of sense to me. But we've also got a ground invasion starting. And we've also taken out a whole bunch of Hamas leaders. And we're also seeing Hamas regrouping in a real way. We've heard from a lot of hostages over the last few weeks. We're seeing some hostages pro the fighting, like released hostage Eli Sharabi, who sat this week in front of the UN in a beautiful, beautiful segment and spoke to them about the horrors of what Hamas are actually doing, how they're taking aid for themselves and not giving it to the hostages at all and not giving it to any of the Gazan civilians. It's a beautiful piece and it's a show of hope from a man who's lost everything, standing up and fighting against the UN who have forced us to provide aid. But on the other hand, we are also seeing a whole bunch of hostages who are massively against us going back to war. Netanyahu has made it clear. There is no more hostage negotiations whilst the war is paused. The military activity will keep on going so that we can increase pressure on Hamas whilst we negotiate for the hostage release. And this is obviously something to do with a whole new shift. This war on Gaza that's happening right now is different to everything that we've seen up until this point. Up until now, we had our hands tied by Biden. We didn't have enough arms to fight. We didn't have enough ammunition, and we were being sanctioned all the time and being forced to feed Hamas at the same time. Now this war looks different. We've got Trump's full backing. We've got as much ammunition as we need, and we have a whole new leadership within the IDF who have a much more intensive plan, an idea of what it means to take over Gaza and get rid of Hamas. This is no longer one of these tit-for-tat wars where we're not really fighting, and I'm hoping against hope that this means that we might actually have a good ending to the war, an ending in which Hamas is gone. Now, interestingly enough, another headline that's not really being talked about so much is the fact that a poll came out this week in which a lot of people from Gaza claimed that they want to immigrate. Do Gazans want to immigrate from Gaza? It seems like the answer might be yes, even though Hamas and the media don't want you to believe it. Look at this poll. This poll pretty clearly states that Palestinians/Gazans really would like to leave Gaza. But obviously the Hamas media is never going to allow for that to get out, and the mainstream media is not going to take this up as a topic because they want to fight against everything that Israel is doing. But it's pretty simple. Gazans don't want to live in Gaza right now. Who would? I wouldn't. And as of yesterday, Somaliland has agreed to potentially take them in if they will be recognized as a sovereign state, a removal of the Palestinians that hate us from our borders. Now, it's never going to happen that all of the Gazans are going to leave. They won't. There's always going to be Hamas terrorists. But if we can minimize their amount of land, remove as many of them away from our borders, and really get rid of this terrorist mentality and bring in new funding to rebuild something that's just not a terror state, there might potentially be a long-term solution for Gaza, which would be nice for us Israelis who would like to sleep at night instead of having rockets fired at us continuously by Hamas. Comment below if you think that Israel should be annexing land as long as Hamas holds on to our hostages. If you think this is a strategy that might potentially get our hostages home. And in other headlines, Trump is attacking the Houthis, as he should, because they are dominating the sea and the shipping routes, as they should not be allowed to do. A small terrorist group literally changing the entire shipping ecosystem because they think they have the right to. Thank you, America, for stopping that. It's insanity and it shouldn't be going on for this long. The Attorney General and the Supreme Court are once again intervening in places that they just don't have a right to, like the government wanting to bring Ben Gvir back into power and them saying that he's not allowed to do that, that they can't do it. Again, out of their jurisdiction and incorrect. If you look at the law, it's pretty self-explanatory. The government's allowed to appoint whoever they would like as a minister of whatever office they want to, as long as he isn't a real criminal. And Ben Gvir is not, even though we may not like a lot of his opinions. Do you guys remember the report from last year claiming that there's been a mass exodus from Israel, that Israelis hate it so much in Israel that they're all trying to leave? Well, this week it was reported as false, that this isn't true. That actually those numbers, the higher numbers of people leaving Israel, came from the influx of Russian immigrants that we had during the war, who have now finally found new places to live and have left our country. This is another example of how the Israeli media taking stories out of context and making us feel that, everybody just wants to leave in Israel. When in truth, we've had more immigration in the last few years than ever before. So many people want to come and live here, even though we're at war. And coming up with these headlines that there's actually a mass exodus is insane. Additionally, we're seeing mass protests all over the country against Ronen Bar being left, etc. But you know what's interesting? You won't ever see them discussing the numbers. How many people are showing up at these mass protests? Because even if it's 200,000, which is a big number, it's a small percentage of what the country really feels. I'm so against this immoral journalism. When you say something like a mass protest, that could mean anything. Provide the numbers, provide the facts. Let us see what's actually going on. How many people really showed up instead of mass amounts of people? It's pretty self-explanatory. It's like the ABC of journalism. Provide the real facts instead of just blowing up stories out of proportion to create fear and to remove the unity that we're trying and hoping to experience in this country. One of the main questions that I want to present to you guys, and I really want to hear your thoughts on the comment, is what we're seeing right now with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is very simply stepping way outside of its jurisdiction, as is the Attorney General. We discussed this a bit in previous episodes, and we'll keep on talking about it as this topic just escalates into a bigger and bigger story here. But what happens when the Supreme Court steps so far out of what it's actually allowed to comment on? We've talked about how the law is so clear on the fact that Prime Minister is allowed to remove the head of the intelligence. But what happens when the Supreme Court says, no, you can't? Should the government be listening to the Supreme Court's demands, even if they're not allowed to make these statements? What's the solution to this? Does that make our country anti-democratic? I really want to hear what you guys have to say on this topic, because I think it's going to become the fundamental question that this government's going to have to deal with. Another headline that's just not being talked about is the fact that 13 yishuvim, what they call settlements or small towns here in Israel, have finally been legalized by the Israeli government. This is the solution to the war. Claiming our land, living in it proudly, and not being afraid of international outrage. Settlements? This is not settlements. These locations should have been legal years ago, and it's an exciting and positive move forward in us claiming the sovereignty and the ability to live in our land as we should have always. No one should be allowed to attack us, no one should be allowed to kill us, and no one should claim that the land is not ours. It is, and that's what it means to be a proud Israeli, so I'm really happy to report that piece of news today. Finally, something positive to talk about. And on today's segment of what Israelis are talking about, have you seen this feud between Naftali Bennett, previous Prime Minister of Israel, and Amit Segal, one of the leading journalists in the country? They have started a Twitter war, which honestly probably shouldn't be the focus of the country right now during a war, but it's an interesting thing for us to talk about because Naftali Bennett, previous Prime Minister who managed to become Prime Minister with only 6 mandates, is now polling as a really, really high candidate in the next elections. Now, he tends to always poll high and not actually manage to pull through, but his voter base is really interesting. He's pulling from the left and he's pulling from the right. And because of that, he's been very careful about making statements that could polarize either one of the spectrum, which in today's society is really, really hard to do. Now, Amit Segal has been calling him out on this, left, right, and center. He's been trying to show Israel, and I don't know if this is a personal vendetta that Amit Segal has against Bennett. He's been calling out Bennett time and time again, and Naftali Bennett finally caved and came out with this pretty intense tweet against Amit Segal. Clashes between journalists and politicians is a norm here in Israel, but the reason this one's specifically interesting is because Amit Segal is a leading journalist for a big part of Naftali Bennett's potential voters. And Bennett coming after him seems like a pretty weird and dangerous angle to take if you want to keep the voters who listen to everything Amit Segal does and says. I don't know where I stand on this whole Naftali Bennett thing, nothing to do with Amit Segal. There's parts of me that really like him and there's parts of me that are very, very hesitant to ever consider voting for him. But an attack on a beloved journalist is just probably not the way you should go if you want to find favor in the eyes of those who listen to Amit Segal. Anyway, it's being talked about all across the media and we're seeing voices from the right and the left come out in support of Bennett or Segal. But let's see where this feud goes because this could potentially lead to Bennett's downfall out of the government. Segal holds a lot of sway. Journalists in Israel hold a lot of sway on people's opinions, and this might get rough for Naftali Bennett if he continues in this way. In the tweet, which we'll show here, but it's in Hebrew, Naftali Bennett basically calls out Amit Segal for defending our government. You all know how I feel about this. I don't need to jump into it. But he's coming after Segal for pulling out old tweets of Bennett that show different opinions to what he's saying now. And Naftali is claiming that you should just focus on, honestly, removing Netanyahu from power. He's calling Netanyahu responsible for everything that's happened on October 7th and is making an enemy out of him, which is a shame because they'd be potential good partners in a future coalition. But again, Bennett and Netanyahu becoming allies in the future is unlikely, seeing as Bennett will probably be taking a whole bunch of Netanyahu's voters from him. And so he doesn't like Amit Segal calling out his past things. But that's the reality of living life today. If you want to be a politician, you have to realize and understand that everything you say in your past till today can be used against you. And you have to have the ability to stand up and support or deny those claims that you made. Or even have the humility to say, I made a mistake, I don't believe that anymore. But Bennett is really, really walking a tricky line right now, and we're just going to have to see how this story unfolds. Drama, drama, drama. Now let's talk about things that are not directly happening here in Israel, but are seriously impacting Israel's morale, and obviously anti-Semitism is on the top of that list. We've seen what's happened on campuses over the last few years, and we've seen how anti-Semitism has become just a little bit crazy. But what we're seeing now with the Trump administration and his cracking down not just on university fundings, but on people who led protests is nothing short than glorious. Let's watch this for a second.
Where exactly are we in the poem that begins, when they came for the communists, I did not speak out? Well, they've already come for the asylum speakers. They've come for the migrant families. Now they've come for Mahmoud Khalil. It's not a very long poem. So how far down the list do you think you are? It is always dangerous to speak in public for Palestinian rights, safety, and freedom with your face uncovered and your name declared. You can be sure you will be harassed, doxxed, terrorized. People will try to get you fired from your job. And Mahmoud, as a student negotiator, took these same risks and many more. Mahmoud is a man of decency, honor, and kindness. He has distinguished himself in his work as an advocate and negotiator, as someone committed to peaceful resolution of difficult situations. He is a consummate diplomat in his disposition and his character. What the Trump government is doing to Mahmoud is obscene. So why do they think they can get away with it? The Trump administration is betting that Americans will happily look the other way as one more Palestinian is victimized here on American soil. They are betting that when you hear Mahmoud's name or the word Palestinian, the parts of you that make you a thinking and rational and caring person will switch off, and you will believe the worst about him, and you will turn a blind eye to these grave violations of his rights. And after what I've seen over the last year and a half, I'm not sure they're wrong. Anti-Palestinian groups have spent all year casually leveling the most dangerous accusations on the flimsiest grounds, and members of our own community have repeated them. Don't like seeing a kafia? Call them a terrorist and call the cops. Don't like their views? Call them anti-Semitic and get them expelled. Don't like that your Jewish colleague has the chutzpah to say free Palestine? Report him for Jew hatred to a university task force. Don't like seeing a broad and diverse movement of courageous young people standing together against the ethnic cleansing of Gaza? Call your friends in the government and send the feds to their door. As an educator, it disgusts me that anyone who wants to be taken seriously in association with a university would deal so ignorantly with language and truth. But more than that, I am ashamed as a Jewish person that this kind of slander has found currency in some parts of my own community in service of the racist and anti-Semitic Trump agenda. Trump's claim that this atrocity combats anti-Semitism is insulting. We will not take lectures on anti-Semitism from segregationists and neo-Nazis. And if you find yourself believing whatever someone tells you about Mahmoud just because he is Palestinian or because he spoke up against a murderous war that you somehow still support, I can only implore you to scrutinize your own soul. Why are we here? Because we want our friend back. But we are also here because what happens to Mahmoud could happen to any of us.
Muhammad Khalil is a 30-year-old student. I don't know why he's a 30-year-old student, but he's been leading this protest, and now, boo-hoo-hoo, he's so sad that there are ramifications to his actions. You know, you should never have been allowed to support terror. You should never have been allowed to get on a campus and say, yay, support Hamas, death to Israel. I don't know if he actually said those words, but you should just never be allowed to. And the fact that he lived in America on a visa for this long without it being revoked is really the insane thing. It's really honestly entertaining to watch these people who lived without any ramifications for their actions now paying the price and really crying about it. Oh, Columbia professors, you guys are so sad about the fact that the people who destroyed your campuses for this long supported terrorists and proudly burnt flags and did the most outrageous things. And now you're losing all your funding. You're sad about that. Oh, such a shame. Columbia now is moving back on all its policies because, surprise, surprise, when Trump decided to pull away the $400 million in funding that they were receiving, suddenly Columbia is willing to put in laws against wearing masks or bringing police to stop potential protests. Make no mistake, the university hasn't suddenly created a moral compass. It just needs money, and it likes money. And so that's why it's acting and according. But yes, more and more students are going to be deported, and I'm all for it. If you support terror, you shouldn't be allowed to live in a Western country. Sorry if you don't like it, but you should have thought about that about a year and a half ago. The reign of anarchy is finally dead. Whilst the Houthis have been firing more and more ballistic missiles at Israel, they didn't just send me and my husband into the bomb shelters. They also sent Prime Minister Netanyahu. Watch this.
ראש הממשלה, החות'ים ישלמו?
לא משלמים. שמור.
I just love his response. They're already paying the price. That's correct. They are. America is going haywire, and I'm all for it. End terror. End the reign of military terror everywhere. Enough is enough. What Israelis are talking about, some tweets and some videos, and I can't wait to see you next week to uncover even more of what's happening. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, do all the things that you're supposed to do to make sure that you see our latest videos. And most importantly, submit your question of the week. We want to hear from you. What we are doing here is not just a podcast. It's not just me sitting on a chair and talking to a camera. We are creating a movement, an important movement, a movement to fight against the mainstream media here in Israel. It was done in the United States, and it needs to happen here, and that's what we're doing. So thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for being here with me and listening as we actually try and make some sense of what's happening instead of just believing the blatant lies that are being fed to us. So submit your questions. Let's talk about the different topics that you seem to think might be misleading from what you're seeing. And I will see you next week right here. I'm Meira, and I'll see you next time.